Does anybody else, Alex, do you want to ask a last question, or does anyone else want to say something?
Should we move on to Oslo?
Well, also, I think we passed already.
Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I could give a little comment about Oslo that I learned recently that I think is very telling, and has repercussions to today. So, when before the Oslo Accords were signed, so first of all, I think the genesis for this is when I get into little arguments with right wingers that I know in my own life. They would often make claims like, oh, Israel does not want to negotiate with Hamas. It's a terror group. It does not accept the existence of Israel. And I always point out, well, if that's the reasoning specifically for Hamas, why was the PLO negotiated with, right? Because up until Oslo, up until the letters of mutual recognition, the PLO also did not recognize Israel either. Right, something had to be brought to the table. They weren't going to give up this bargaining chip, just kind of unilaterally and for no discernible reason. And recently, when I read these letters of mutual recognition that were sent by Arafat to the Norwegian foreign minister, right, who was one of the people, I guess, presiding over the Oslo agreements, and Arafat also sent a letter to Rabin. And Rabin sent a letter back to Arafat. And what's very telling about that interaction is Arafat begins in his letter to Rabin with it's very kind of like, maybe you could call it melodramatic language. It's a long letter. It's very, sort of like, we're going to accept the existence of Israel. We're looking for peace, so on and so forth. Many, many sentences. And Rabin's response is nothing more than something like 3 sentences long. And the difference between the first letter and the second is Arafat is recognizing the existence of Israel, and Rabin is recognizing only the fact that the PLO is the proper representative of the Palestinian people, right? And I guess with hindsight, we could sort of see where all this was going. But I would think that even at the time, and maybe some of you might comment on this, but maybe even at the time, if people had knowledge of these letters, they saw how, on the one hand, Arafat is so placating, and then on the other hand, Rabin is so dismissive, right? And this might have caused alarm bells right from the very beginning, right before even the Oslo process properly began.
Well, I'm gonna just comment on that because I do have vivid memories. Most Palestinians in positions of leadership either believed or said they believed that a state would come out of the Oslo Accord. Now, there were a very small group of people who said no. Edward Said in the United States, who was kind of the unofficial representative of the Palestinian people, he said Oslo was a catastrophe, and he refused to go on the White House lawn for the famous handshake between
Arafat and Rabin.
Rabin. There was the Palestinian from Gaza,
Haider Abdel Shafi.
Haider Abdel Shafi, who was a very honest man. He was an honest man. Yes. Whether he was smart politically, I can't say, but he was honest and he had dignity. And he said, there is nothing in the Oslo Accord that says the settlements will not be continued. Israel promises not to continue building the settlements. And he said, if that's not in the accord, I'm not signing it. I won't go along with it. There were a couple of others who expressed mixed feelings about Oslo, and that would include Azmi Bashara and I forgot the fellow's name, the sociologist from Berzei.
Salim Tamari.
Salim Tamari. There were very few. In Israel Shahak said, forget it, this is a disaster. In the United States, Professor Chomsky. With those exceptions, everybody went along, either because they believed it or because they thought it would be profitable for them to believe it, because then you become part of the Oslo show, which was a very long-running show, and there was a lot of money to be made from being part of the Oslo show. I remember I opposed it, not because I had special knowledge, but because the people I respected said this is a disaster. One of the provisions in the Oslo Accord was to allow for a Palestinian security force. And it allowed for, I think, 15,000 Palestinians in the security force. I talked to a good friend of mine. His name was Ghassan Endoni. He was a physicist at Birzeit University. Very smart guy. And he was committed. And I said, from what I understand, Oslo Accord is a disaster. And he said, no, because even if Israel doesn't give us the state, we'll still have an army. We'll have that security force. And I thought, okay, maybe there's an argument there. So now here's the funny, not the funny footnote. It's a footnote. It's not so funny. So one of the people to join the security force was Musa's brother, Nur. And I met Nur. Nur was very poor, unemployed, like most young people at that point in Fawar camp, which is where Musa's from. And if you joined the security force, they gave you a car. You got a car. And you got a decent income. So one day I'm talking to Nur, and Musa was there. I don't know, Musa, if you'll remember this. I said to Nur, so what are you going to do if the Israelis tell you to arrest your brother? And Nur replied, I'll arrest him. And that was at that moment I realized, I think we have a disaster here.
Yes.
That they created a real Arab army. I'll arrest him. And at that point, for me, it kind of sunk in. This Oslo thing is a disaster. Last, though, I heard from Musa, I don't know why, but he told me the security force fired him. So I don't know why that happened, but Musa, do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember him.
And Musa just smiled. I was a little surprised. I would be very angry if my brother said, of course I'll arrest you. And that was really, it was a moment where you realized Arafat always thought he was so clever that he can outsmart everyone. So he figured, all right, I'll sign the Oslo Accord, and then I'll trick them, I'm so clever, I'm so smart. You don't trick the Israelis. You don't trick the Americans. They had a plan. They knew exactly what they were doing. And the fact of the matter is, everything went according to plan, and they won. They had the great idea, why can't we establish an Arab government without an Arab state? So everywhere else you had an Arab state with a repressive government. So now they decide we can establish a repressive government without even a state. And that's what they did. And they got just one more rotten Arab government, but without the state.